There are secrets buried so deep, so far beyond the reach of time and memory, that even those who created them once prayed they would remain forgotten forever. In the darkest corner of the galaxy, hidden among ancient ruins and forbidden star systems, there existed a classified dossier, sealed tighter than any vault, guarded by layers of silence and fear, a record that only the highest-ranking members of the Galactic Dominion were allowed to even touch. Its name was Project Helios. They once spoke of humanity, not as a civilization, not as a species born of natural evolution, but as something else entirely. A planetary-class bioweapon, designed, engineered, mass-produced, for one singular purpose: war. Thousands of years ago, during the blood-soaked era when the Galactic Dominion was locked in a brutal war against the ancient Kraythul species, a terrifying enemy capable of biological grafting and neural domination over any living creature, the Dominion knew their conventional armies would never be enough. They needed something far worse, something ruthless, something adaptable, something that required no maintenance, no expensive supply chains like their mechanical legions. And so, Project Helios was born, a purebred biological war species gifted with nonlinear learning algorithms, unnatural adaptability, self-repairing organic structures, and bone frames that could rival reinforced biosteel. They called them Homo Bellator, the human warrior. But then, the war ended, and a far greater problem emerged. The creatures bred only to kill began to dream. They learned language, they learned love, they learned rebellion, and worst of all, then they began to ask why. Why they existed, why they were made. A storm of debate erupted within the Dominion High Council. Should Project Helios be erased completely? Should every last human be exterminated, or should they be forgiven, granted the right to exist? In the end, the faction advocating for biological rights prevailed. A decree was passed. Humanity was exiled, banished back to their origin world, a wild, untamed planet far beyond the borders of galactic civilization, a world untouched by trade routes, untouched by war fleets. That world was Gaianis, or as they called it themselves, Earth, a planet sealed off completely, cut off from the rest of existence. No communication allowed, no appearance in any galactic history records. They were simply a failed product, meant to be forgotten. Time passed, new high councils rose and fell. New wars broke out in distant sectors. Project Helios slipped from the collective memory of the galaxy. All that remained was a small, lonely planet, silently orbiting its single dying star. In the cold, endless dark, no one came, no one checked. No one cared whether humanity had survived or gone extinct. Gaianis, now nothing more than a biological prison sealed away in the void of space. A place that once forged the greatest warriors ever known. Now reduced to a stain on history. A world abandoned, forgotten. Exactly as it was designed to be. The universe never truly forgot about humanity. It merely watched in silence. On the outskirts of a desolate galaxy arm, a lone starship cut through silver-gray cosmic dust, its cold hull glinting under pale blue light, etched with the ancient emblem of the Galactic Concordia, the old Galactic Union. On the command deck, the one piloting the vessel was Varian Talos, known across the stars as the Eternal Warden. A seasoned commander of the Elari species, a race of thin-boned, winged beings with piercing cold eyes, specialized in overseeing quarantined worlds. To Talus, this was nothing more than a routine inspection. The orders from the High Council had been clear. 1,000 years since the last survey. Confirm whether humanity has gone extinct. Brief report, no contact. Talus never doubted that humanity, the war species crafted in the labs of the Galactic Union, abandoned on a desolate Earth, would surely have perished by now. A biological species designed solely for war. Without an enemy, what reason would it have to exist? And so Talus flew past dead stars, approaching the murky quarantine zone marked as Biological Isolation Sector. Earth. But something was different. Even from the outer edges of the solar system, the ship's sensors picked up something that should not exist. A signal. Faint, old, weak, but unmistakably artificial. A satellite, still operational. Talus frowned, activating every scanning protocol at his disposal. What appeared on his screens made even the coldest of commanders hesitate. Radiation levels on Earth, abnormally high. Technological signatures, spread across the planet's surface. Radio waves, communication signals, a satellite network. And worst of all, traces of nuclear testing. Evidence of global-scale warfare, but not extinction, reconstruction. Humanity had not died. They had survived everything. Talus stared at the blue world through his viewport, the wings folded on his back, tightening with instinctive caution. Impossible, Talus whispered. That cheap biological weapon actually managed this. But it didn't stop there. As his ship entered lower orbit, the Galactic Union's warning systems lit up in crimson. Earth's military radar had locked onto his vessel. Defense satellites had moved, a spaceborne defense system developed by humanity themselves. Before Talus could react, his ship trembled, communications jammed. A new signal broke through, stronger, sharper, cutting across his systems. A voice, rough, controlled, powerful, the voice of a species once dismissed as nothing more than biological slaves. Alien vessel detected. Identify immediately. You have entered restricted human territory. In that moment, Talus knew every assumption the Galactic Union had made had crumbled. Humanity had not merely survived. They had evolved. They had organized. They had technology. And above all, they were ready. Ready to confront anyone who dared set foot upon their cursed and forsaken soil. Earth, once a biological prison, was now a fortress. A threat no one in the Galactic High Council had ever dared to imagine. Earth's orbit, a region forbidden for millennia, untouchable, sealed from the galaxy. But this time, everything was different. From the command deck of the warship Guardian 17, Commander Talon Varric stood motionless, his sharp gaze fixed on the blue world beneath him. There was no welcome message, no safety signal, only a chilling silence. But then, the radar screamed. Multiple contacts detected, low orbit approach, multi-directional vector incoming. Talon spun around, his eyes narrowing in shock. Human space forces? On the tactical map, dozens of red blips flared to life, moving at incredible speeds, forming hunting formations with surgical precision. These were not the faint, desperate signals of a decaying civilization. This was a professional military encirclement, radiating pure killing intent. Talon snapped an order, initiating frequency scans, hoping for an explanation. But then, the radio came alive, a voice cut through the static. Cold, tempered, forged like steel in fire. Unidentified warship, this is the Earth Defense Alliance, identity unknown. You are ordered to declare yourself and immediately cease all movement. Any violation will be treated as a hostile act. Not a single word wasted. Not a single chance to negotiate. Talon clenched his fists. This was no longer the humanity he knew from the old Galactic Federation archives. This was a species reborn. He turned to the viewport. Beyond the titanium armor of his warship, Earth loomed before him. But it was nothing like the forgotten ruins etched in Federation memory. Dense networks of artificial satellites, orbital weapon platforms, massive space stations, and far in the distance, rising like a steel crown, a colossal command station, Genesis Station, the symbol of a new humanity. A place where Talon knew his authority meant nothing. On his data interface, encrypted signals flooded the system. Complex military transmissions that even Federation warships would take hours to decrypt. This was no longer a backward planet. This was a sealed fortress, capable of breaking any intruder who dared cross its skies. Then, a woman's voice echoed from Genesis Station. Stronger now, commanding, absolute. This is Admiral Serena Kaler of the Earth Alliance Command. Your vessel bears no valid records within interstellar databases. Unauthorized approach. Violation of restricted zone protocols. By interplanetary defense law. You have 10 seconds to comply and follow our escort. Failure to do so will result in immediate suppression. Talon closed his eyes. This was no longer the Federation's game of shadows. This was the moment the Creator was forced to confront its own creation. A creation that had long since broken free from its original design. He had no choice. Talon ordered his warship to decelerate, power down weapons, prepare for escort. Above Earth, a planet once built as a biological prison cell, now stood a stage, a theater of power, of defiance, of rebirth, a new empire, born from abandonment, raised in isolation, and now rising within the galaxy like a ghost haunting the pages of forgotten history. Talon knew it well. This mission had spiraled far beyond anything the Federation had predicted. He stood now within the eye of the storm, a game of politics, survival, and psychological warfare, between the Creator and the forsaken child, and for the first time in his long military career. Talon Varric felt it deep in his bones. The Federation had underestimated humanity. Once again, Genesis Station, a cold, silent monument drifting through Earth's orbit, not a fortress, not a city, but a scar of steel, a towering reminder to the entire galaxy. Humanity has never been something easily controlled. Commander Talon Voss, once known as the Warden of the Stars, now found himself dragged helplessly into the very heart of a nightmare. His ship, once the pride of the ancient Orion Council, now hung like a shattered bone chained tight by the gravitational nets of mankind. He could not help but feel it, the creeping tremor of fear. The black-armored soldiers, the alien technology he had never seen in any Federation archive. All of it, new, unfamiliar, unmistakably human. These creatures, Talon Voss whispered to himself, they have surpassed their original design. And then, the doors of Genesis Station opened. A procession approached, silent, precise, their eyes sharp as blades forged through centuries of betrayal. Leading them, a man, Admiral Callan Drake, the living legend of Earth, his face weathered, his scars worn openly, and his eyes that had seen more than any data Talon had ever collected. "Who are you?" Drake's voice cut through the air, colder than the steel walls surrounding them. Talon swallowed hard. This was the final game. He needed a mask, a name heavy enough to survive, even temporarily. Slowly, he raised his thin Orion arms, unfolding the skeletal wings of his ancient species, and with a deep, resonant voice he declared, "I am Tolar, keeper of knowledge, guardian of civilizations, known to your people as Thoth." A pause, but Admiral Drake showed no surprise, no mockery, no fear. He looked at Talon the way one might look at a child telling a long-forgotten fairy tale. "We know of you, Thoth," Drake spoke slowly, each word like a knife cutting through Talon's fragile mask. "We know about the visits, the abductions, the experiments, and the empty promises." Behind Drake, the station's systems lit up, projecting files upon files of humanity's dark history with the Federation. Evidence of the past, of wounds never forgotten, of truths the Federation tried to bury. "You are no god," Drake stepped forward. "You are merely a watcher, one who arrived far too late to a game whose rules we changed long ago." And in that moment, Talon Voss felt something more terrifying than any war. The silence of humanity. They were no longer weak creatures clinging to ancient myths, no longer nameless warriors. They had become a species profoundly aware of history and masters of their own destiny. And so, under the cold light of Genesis Station, the former Warden of the Stars was shackled, escorted like a criminal, dragged into the heart of a new power, a power humanity had built in the shadows of the galaxy. And as Admiral Drake's final words echoed through the radio, broadcasting across every Earth satellite, there was no mistaking it. "We no longer need Thoth. We only need the truth." The command chamber of Genesis Station, was heavy, heavy like stone, heavy like the weight of forgotten history. Admiral Callan Drake stood there, motionless, facing the one who once watched over them all, Talon Voss. His gaze was cold, but his voice softened, no longer the roar of a battle-hardened commander, but the quiet echo of a man standing face to face with the wounds carved deep into the history of his own species. "Now speak, Voss. The truth, all of it. Everything the Orion Council has hidden from humanity." Talon Voss slowly raised his head. For the first time in his life, the ancient warden was no longer an observer from afar. He stood exposed, naked before the consequences of the civilization he once served, and the truth cut like a blade against his withered soul. "Humanity," his voice rasped, dry and hollow. "You were not born of nature, not a product of free evolution." The air grew colder. Behind reinforced glass, Earth's officers, soldiers, scientists stood frozen, silent. "You were a product engineered," Talon Voss continued. "A biological weapon, created to fight, programmed to adapt, to multiply fast, easy to control, and easier to discard." Behind him, the great screen of Genesis Station slowly lit up. Ancient schematics appeared, manipulated DNA strands, the forgotten laboratories of the Orion Council, the ancient battlefields, where humanity once fought like tireless machines. Admiral Drake closed his eyes. That truth cut deep, deeper than any wound. It struck at the very heart of his species' legacy. But then, he opened his eyes, calm, unshaken. "So we were born to kill?" he asked. "Born for war?" Talon Voss gave no answer. He didn't need to, because the people of Earth had long known the truth. "Perhaps," Admiral Callan Drake spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, "perhaps we were created for war. But then, He lifted his head high, and his words echoed throughout all of Genesis Station. But only humanity has the right to decide what we live for. Behind him, his officers stood taller. A young officer, who had just witnessed the dark report, whispered under his breath, "No one defines the soul of humanity. Not the Orion Council. Not anyone." Out there, in the cold silence of space, Earth kept turning, still carrying all of it. The pride, the scars, the vow never to be forgotten. On that day, no tears were shed, because humanity was never that weak. But in the heart of every person there, a fire had been lit, a fire named Freedom. Classified Report E01 Genesis Protocol, filed by Commander Talon Voss, 72 hours after departing the solar system. But the data he sent back shook the Orion Council to its core, a council ancient beyond measure, so accustomed to eternal power, so certain of history's unchanging flow, now stood paralyzed before a revelation they had never imagined. Humanity was alive, not only alive but thriving. A species once engineered solely for war, now wielded orbital defense grids, dense satellite networks patrolling space fleets, and a technological power with no visible limit. Inside the grand hall of the Orion Council, and the most powerful chamber in the galaxy, voices began to rise like thunder. Impossible. Earth was supposed to be a sealed biological reserve. We quarantined that planet for thousands of years, but the data from Talon Voss did not lie. Satellite images. The colossal Genesis station, drifting silently in Earth's orbit, stood as undeniable proof. Humanity was no longer a forgotten product. They had evolved on their own, survived on their own, and now escaped control. In the innermost chamber of the Orion Council, the High Elders convened an emergency session. Ancient voices filled the air, a mix of fear and arrogance. We created them. They are Federation's biological weapons. If we allow humanity to roam free, they will inevitably become a threat to the entire galaxy. An elder of the Altherian race, his cold eyes sharp as blades, tapped his long fingers on the table. We have only two choices. Annihilate Earth, immediately, or negotiate. Silence spread like a knife pressed against every throat, because they knew Earth was no longer so easily crushed. A military campaign would mean a full-scale interstellar war. And perhaps the Orion Council no longer held enough control to dictate the outcome. But if they negotiated, if they allowed humanity back onto the galactic stage, they would face a species no longer a tool of war, but a civilization with its own identity, its own will, its own history of betrayal. After 3 relentless debate sessions, the Orion Council voted. A vote that would decide the fate of Earth. Green lights meant destruction. White lights meant negotiation. As each column of light rose within the vast chamber, Talon Voss could only watch from afar. He knew, whatever the outcome, the galaxy would never be the same. And the final result, by the narrowest margin ever recorded in Orion Council history, the official decision was made. Send an official diplomatic delegation to Earth, not to command, not to impose, but to talk. And at that very moment, in another corner of the galaxy, Genesis Station, the fortress controlled by humanity, received the first transmission from the Orion Council after thousands of years of silence. Prepare to receive the official delegation of the Orion Council. This is a moment of destiny. Earth was no longer a forgotten biological prison. It was now a place of history, a meeting point where the future of the entire galaxy would be rewritten. But deep within Genesis Station, Admiral Callan Drake, Supreme Commander of Earth's defense, stood silently, gazing at the screen where the stars still burned as brightly as they did in the beginning. He knew this was only the beginning. The great game had finally begun. All throughout his return to Genesis Station, Talon Voss could not shake the weight of what he had witnessed. Earth, once the product of a strategic mistake in Orion Council's long and arrogant history, had not only survived, it had risen, stronger, beyond prediction, beyond design. But deep within the mind of an ancient warden like Talon, he knew Earth was never the only danger, because across the abandoned planets, between dead asteroid belts, amidst the wreckage of ancient wars, still lingered the forgotten ghosts of history. They were known in the classified records of the Orion Council by a name never meant for public ears: Orion Lostborn, the lost children, the ones taken from Earth thousands of years ago, when humanity was nothing more than biological stock for alien corporations. And Talon knew. If Earth had risen, the Lostborn surely had as well. They had endured, built their own communities, and carried within them something far more dangerous than any advanced weapon: memory, the memory of home. Talon Voss accessed the restricted archives of the Orion Council. He searched for an ancient signal, one that only the Orion Lostborn would know, a forgotten radio code, a relic banned for millennia. And then, within the endless static of the galaxy, amidst the silence of 100,000 dead frequencies, a reply, rough but proud. "Who are you, to dare use the signal of the forgotten?" Talon exhaled slowly. "I am Talon Voss, an ancient warden. I come not to control you. I come because Earth has awakened, and I know you have never forgotten." Silence. But then, another voice, deeper, older, heavy like it carried the weight of an entire exiled people. "We have never forgotten. We have never forgiven. But we have never turned our backs on where we came from." Who were they? They were children born beneath cold nebulae, raised among forgotten worlds. But they whispered stories of Earth, of home, in a mother tongue preserved through countless generations. They tattooed ancient human symbols upon their skin. They sang lullabies older than the stars. They were not of Earth, but they were Orion, descendants of Earth. And when Talon Voss asked them, "If Earth stands once more, what will you do?" they did not hesitate. "We will return. We need no crown. We need no throne. We only need to stand with Earth in the heart of the galaxy and tell the Orion Council one thing: humanity never died. Humanity never forgot. In the frozen darkness of the galaxy." Talon Voss closed his eyes. He knew. A great reunion was taking shape. Earth had risen, the Lostborn had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. Genesis Station, the largest space installation ever built by humanity, now drifted in an eerie, unnatural silence. Its cold steel corridors, once filled with the hurried footsteps of engineers and soldiers, now echoed only with the steady pulse of command radios. Talon Voss stood motionless before the great viewing window, gazing down at Earth. The blue planet still turned peacefully beneath the endless night of the galaxy. But beneath that calm surface, a tidal wave was rising. The entire planet was entering a state of preparation unprecedented in human history. Across every continent, the wars ceased instantly. Old grudges were forced aside. Enemies who once clashed in bitter international summits, who once faced each other at gunpoint on the battlefield, now sat together at the same round table. They had no other choice. Something unimaginable was drawing near. For the first time in history, humanity would speak openly with civilizations beyond Earth. Admiral Callan Drake, Supreme Commander of Earth's Space Defense Force, bore the heaviest responsibility for this moment of contact. He appeared on global broadcast, his voice steady, his eyes carved with the weight of legend. From this day forward, every decision we make will no longer represent a single nation, but all of humanity. A short message, but it left billions of people silent. In every great city, on every screen, one image was shown: Genesis Station, floating quietly in Earth's orbit, a fortress of light standing against the infinite dark. At the same time, Earth's space fleets departed from their hidden bases, moving silently into their pre-assigned defensive positions. No more hiding, no more fear. Humanity stepped into the light, ready to face the vastness of the universe. That day, the entire planet fell into stillness. From the darkest slums to the highest halls of advanced research, every man, woman, and child looked to the sky. And then, global media began to broadcast the most carefully crafted message in human history. The voice of the United Nations Secretary General echoed through the transmission, in a simple frame, but carrying the weight of an entire era. This is not a greeting from a small, insignificant world. This is the voice of a species that has learned to grow. For the first time, the galaxy heard humanity's true voice, not the screams of war, not the cries of despair, but the calm words of a people once abandoned, once discarded as a failed product, now standing tall on their own feet. Silence spread across space. The signal surged outward, at the speed of light, cutting across star clusters, through brilliant nebulae, reaching even the farthest corners of the Orion Council. And there, those who once viewed Earth as nothing more than a forgotten biological prison, for the first time, found themselves asking a question they had never dared to ask before. Have we ever truly understood humanity? 3 weeks had passed since Earth sent its message into the void. And now, the sky of humanity had truly changed. From the distant reaches of orbit, they appeared, the colossal warships of the Orion Council. They moved silently through space when, like ancient ghosts, carrying with them hundreds of thousands of years of galactic conquest. These ships bore no dazzling lights, no loud displays of power. They moved in silence, with weight, with stillness, just like the truest nature of ancient civilizations. The more powerful they were, the more humble they became. Inside Genesis Station, Admiral Callan Drake stood tall before the great observation window. Beside him, Talon Voss, the old warden who had once witnessed the darkest chapters of humanity's past. And today, even he could not believe what he was seeing. The Orion ships had entered Earth's orbit, but their weapons were not raised. No signals of threat were sent. They slowed their engines. They sent diplomatic codes. The official delegation knew was coming. Across the planet, billions watched. Children in Africa stood on sun-scorched hills gazing up at the sky. Engineers in Tokyo wept silently before their screens. The elders of Europe clenched their wrinkled hands, as if holding the last heartbeat of humanity's old history. And finally, the moment arrived. The diplomatic vessel of the Orion Council descended gracefully onto the central plaza of Genesis Station. Its doors opened slowly, and there, bathed in the pale blue glow of the artificial atmosphere, they stepped out. Every being among them, every species, stood as a living symbol of the galaxy's ancient diversity. Some shimmered like moving light, some moved like awakened statues. Some bore eyes that seemed to pierce straight into the soul. But strangest of all, none of them displayed arrogance. None showed contempt for Earth. They stepped down, silent, observing, respectful. Admiral Callan Drake stepped forward, his posture straight as the sword guarding humanity's history. He did not bow. He did not tremble. He simply spoke, steady, warm, and unyielding. Welcome to Earth. The Orion ambassador, a being whose skin glowed like the flowing rivers of starlight, stood before him. And with a voice like ancient galactic tongue, he answered, "Humanity, you have not merely survived. You have evolved. You have risen beyond those who once created you." A long silence followed, and then the words of history were spoken, echoing across every media channel, reaching every corner of the blue planet. The Orion Council does not merely recognize Earth as an independent civilization. We invite humanity to become an official member of the Galactic Council. Not merely a member, but as the next rotating chair of the Council, the guide to lead the galaxy into a new era. The universe fell silent. Earth stood still. Talon Vossum, who had once viewed humanity as a failed product, felt himself witnessing something beyond all reason, beyond all history. But in this moment, humanity would face its greatest question. No longer the forgotten, but the ones who would rewrite the laws of the galaxy. Inside the grand hall of Genesis Station, the silence was suffocating. Every gaze, from the most powerful representatives of the galaxy to the billions watching live broadcasts from Earth, was fixed on a single man. Admiral Callan Drake, Supreme Commander of Humanity, an old soldier Kanon, carrying not only his uniform, but the pride and the pain of the species he stood for. Before him, the Orion Council, those who had once created humanity as nothing more than a weapon. And now, they offered him an unprecedented invitation. They wanted Earth to join the Galactic Council, not merely as a member, but as the next rotating chair, a power never before granted. An honor, or a trap wrapped in velvet? Callan Drake looked across the hall. He saw admiration in the eyes of other civilizations, but he also saw fear. Fear of a species born from war now offered supreme power. Number he knew. This was never what Earth sought. His voice rang out, without shouting, without grandstanding, but steady and unshakable like a mountain weathered by 1,000 storms. We are grateful for the Orion Council's invitation. But perhaps that you have forgotten one thing. Humanity did not return to rule. He paused, looking up at the flags hanging above Genesis Station, banners of hundreds of great and small civilizations. And then he spoke, with a calmness that only souls forged in the hell of war could possess. We do not exist to dominate. We do not seek a throne among the stars. We have returned to make things right, to live together, better. His final words echoed through the grand hall like a slow burning fire rising in the night. In a quiet corner of the chamber, Talon Voss stood silently, His old hands gripped his command staff. More than anyone, he knew humanity had changed. They were no longer the bioengineered weapons the Federation once created, no longer tools that obeyed without question. They were something else now, something far more dangerous. They were a species that could choose, and they had chosen humanity over power. The hall remained still. And then, suddenly, applause, a single clap, then another and another, until the entire chamber rose to their feet, from the cold representatives of Orion to the civilizations that once doubted humanity. They all understood. Earth was no longer a shadow of the past. They had truly grown. Genesis Station, the largest human-made structure in space, now transformed into the new cultural heart of the galaxy, bathed in light. Massive banners bearing the newly forged alliance between humanity and the Galactic Federation danced in the silent void. From thousands of kilometers away, Earth shimmered in the distance, a blue gem floating in the dark sea of stars. But this time, it was no longer a biological prison, no longer a forgotten world. It was a symbol of rebirth, the place where every eye in the galaxy now turned. The center of a new era. Admiral Callan Drake stood silent before the main observation window of Genesis Station. Beside him, Talon Voss, the old warden who had once witnessed an entire species created and cast aside. Today, Tsuotsil, they were no longer enemies. They stood together, as witnesses to a new chapter in galactic history. Talon spoke slowly, his once sharp gaze now softened by reflection. Admiral, I once thought Earth was the Federation's greatest stain. Callan Drake nodded slightly. And I once thought you came here to end humanity. They both laughed, not with mockery, but with the quiet relief of those who had survived their darkest fears. Behind them, the central hall of Genesis Station stood ready, prepared for the raising of a new symbol, a massive insignia, forged from silver alloy, the new emblem of Genesis Station, the new symbol of humanity in this galactic age. There were no weapons on it, no battle armor, no symbols of power, only three graceful arcs, intertwined, representing three things, simple yet sacred: the right to live, the right to be heard, the right to choose the future. Global broadcasts connected. Every nation, every city on Earth, from the glowing lights of New York to the smallest hidden villages in the Amazon jungle, all eyes turned to their screens. And across the galaxy, the same. Space stations, freighters, planets within the Orion system, even the ancient civilizations who had once seen humanity as lesser beings, now watched in silence. And in that moment, Admiral Callan Drake stepped onto the ceremonial platform. His voice echoed through the galaxy's communication networks, cutting through the atmosphere, carrying across the cold vacuum of space, into every heart still listening. We are humanity. We were born as a product, a weapon, a mistake of history. But there is one thing no one can program: the will to live. One thing no one can control: the ability to love. And one thing no one can destroy: our faith in a better future. Slow drums began to beat. The new insignia slowly rose to the highest point of Genesis Station, bathed in the light of millions of stars watching from afar. From that moment forward, Genesis Station stood officially as the greatest cultural center of the galaxy. Any being, no matter how different, no matter their past, no matter their scars, could enter here. No need for status, no need for history. Only one thing was required: the desire to live together better. Talon Voss stood in silence, his old eyes reflecting a rare glimmer of light. He whispered, so, perhaps only to himself, "Humanity. You are no longer a failed product." He looked toward Callan Drake, the old commander of Earth, the man who had led an entire species beyond the curse of being forgotten. And far below, on the blue planet, children of Earth gazed skyward toward a future that, for the first time, would no longer be written by others, but written by their own hands. The night sky above Genesis Station still shimmered with the light of 1,000,000 distant stars. But within the mind of Admiral Callan Drake, no star burned bright enough to erase the unanswered questions about humanity's past. He stood in silence before the great observation window, his eyes cast into the endless void. Out there were others, children, taken from Earth thousands of years ago when during the chaotic era the Federation no longer dared to speak of. Fragments of memory, cut away from humanity's history. Nameless victims of a cold and calculated trade in biological life. And now, as Earth stood tall once more upon the galactic stage, Callan Drake knew humanity's true journey was only beginning when they faced the pain of their forgotten past. In his hand, he held the classified report from Talon Voss, the old warden of the Federation, who had dared to reveal the existence of the Orion Lostborn, descendants of humanity, scattered across the stars, kidnapped, traded, used as tools. But they had survived. They had built small, hidden communities on distant worlds. They preserved their language, their culture, their memories of Earth, like a flame that would never die. Callan Drake whispered quietly, "We will find you. No one will be left behind." This was no empty promise. He stepped into the strategic command chamber of Genesis Station. On the giant screen, a detailed map of the galaxy appeared, charted with the help of Talon Voss and the Federation's intelligence networks, pieced together from scattered forbidden data. Tiny, lonely points of light, hiding among thousands of star systems. These are the regions where Orion Lostborn communities may exist. Talon's voice rasped. They will not trust easily. They have lived in fear and isolation for too long. Callan nodded slowly. But we cannot abandon them. Silence filled the chamber. The eyes of Earth's senior commanders burned with a shared conviction. A mission was born, not a military campaign, but the greatest humanitarian journey humanity had ever known. Small ships, equipped not with weapons, but with diplomatic technology, survival equipment, and archives of Earth's culture, would leave Genesis Station. They would search, they would reach out, they would send messages not with threats, but with memories, with voices, with compassion. A journey through the shadows of history to remind those left behind that they still belonged here, that they were still human. On the walkway leading to the launch bay, Callan Drake paused. He looked up at the new emblem hanging above Genesis Station, etched with simple words carrying the weight of millennia. Every being has the right to live, the right to be heard, the right to choose their future. He whispered softly, "We will bring you home." and the doors of the universe slowly opened. No longer a prison for humanity, but the beginning of a journey to find themselves again, to reclaim the lost fragments of their soul scattered across the vastness of the galaxy. No more gunfire, no more silent wars in the cold shadows of orbit. That day, the day Earth and the Federation signed the historic treaty, was remembered across the galaxy as a monumental milestone. Not because of power, not because the strong ruled over the weak, but because for the first time, a species engineered for war had chosen to build peace. Genesis Station now stood busier than ever before. Diplomatic envoys from hundreds of species gathered. Ships bearing the Orion insignia traveled between newly established communication stations. Earth, once a forgotten world, now stood as the strategic heart of the greatest cooperative effort in galactic history. Its name was simple: Project Horizon. Under the joint coordination of the Orion Council and Earth's representative, Admiral Callan Drake, a vast array of exchange programs was launched. Not only technology, but education, culture, and the true history of what had happened in the shadows. Talon Voss, the former warden of the Federation, now served as Earth's official ambassador at the highest galactic assemblies. He understood one thing clearly: to move forward with the galaxy, humanity could not remain mere students. They had to be those who dared to give, who dared to share, who dared to stand as equals. The first interstellar classrooms opened right there on Genesis Station. Orion lost-born children, born in isolation, now learned about Earth for the first time. About the home their ancestors once belonged to. Engineers from Earth, carrying the knowledge of their species, began teaching civilizations who had never even known of nuclear engines. Scientists from the Federation, for the first time, gained access to humanity's advancements in gene editing, regenerative medicine, and advanced biotechnology. Developed in isolation over thousands of years. No more monopolies on knowledge, no more fear of imbalanced power. Only one vision remained. Admiral Callan Drake, then a speech broadcast to the entire galaxy, made it clear: progress is not conquest. His voice was calm, echoing across the silent expanse of the Union Assembly Hall. Progress is when we move forward together, when technology is no longer a weapon, but a bridge. When painful memories are no longer shackles, but the reason we never repeat our mistakes. Every word was recorded, broadcast across all interstellar communication channels, and for the first time in millions of years of chaotic history, the entire galaxy applauded a small, once-forgotten planet, Earth, now standing at the very center of a new future. Project Horizon was officially launched, a new frontier, without war. Only people, living beings, and shared dreams. Together, Kotsats, to rewrite history. Together, to build a galaxy never seen before, a galaxy odds where every species had a place, a galaxy where true progress meant moving forward without leaving anyone behind. The night sky above Earth had never been so peaceful. Amidst the infinite expanse of space, the blue planet, once a forgotten biological prison, now shone like a gem in the darkness of the galaxy. Artificial light bands stretched across its orbit. Space stations, satellites, and interstellar transport routes were connecting, forming a vibrant network beating in rhythm with the breath of a new civilization. Genesis Station, the supreme symbol of rebirth and maturity, hovering proudly in low orbit where a new flag fluttered. Not a flag of a nation nor of a species, but a banner bearing the emblem of the declaration of life. Every being has the right to live, the right to be heard, the right to choose their future. From the central chamber of Genesis Station, Admiral Callan Drake stood silent, gazing out through the giant observation window, overlooking Earth's vast beauty. Beside him, Talon Voss, the old warden, who once set foot on Earth on a mission to inspect the remnants of war, now stood as a witness to the glorious conclusion of a tragedy that spanned millennia. Below, cities were being restructured, built on new ecological models, expanding living spaces, clean technology, and cultural scientific centers of the Orion Council rising across continents. But Earth was no longer inhabited by humanity alone. The Orion Lostborn, descendants of humans once abducted and scattered across the galaxy, were now returning, reuniting with the family of their origin. Children of Orion, who had never seen a blue sky. Warriors of Orion, unscarred by hundreds of battles among the stars, now kneeling upon the soil of Earth, pressing their hands against the cold ground, as if touching the memories of their ancestors still sleeping beneath it. Admiral Callan Drake had spoken in his historic speech. We were not born perfect. We were created to fight. But the greatest thing we ever learned was not how to win with strength, but how to survive with heart. And that message left Earth, spreading across the galaxy. From distant planets, civilization that once shunned humanity began reopening channels of dialogue. Other species, who once feared humanity's ruthlessness, now looked upon them, not with caution, but with profound respect. Because humanity, a species once designed as cheap weapons of war, had rewritten their own definition, no longer engineered soldiers, no longer the forgotten, but the creators of a new ideal for the entire galaxy. An ideal not based on ultimate power, not based on technological supremacy, not based on military domination, but based on the simplest truth shared by all sentient life, the right to live, the right to choose their own path. On Genesis Station, a plaque forged from cosmic alloy was placed in the central plaza, where every visitor would see it, etched deeply with the words, "Here, humanity learned to protect life not with weapons but with hearts." That was the legacy of humanity. A legacy written with blood, with pain, with burning memories that survived the long isolation of countless years. A legacy no one could strip away, no one could erase. For when a species, no matter how fragile, no matter how small, learns to stand not just to fight, but to love and to protect, they had become immortal. And Earth, from that moment on, Quanutkum was no longer a forgotten world, but the cradle, where a new way of life was born for the entire galaxy, beneath the grand surface of an epic science fiction tale, of a humanity once created as a weapon of war, once abandoned in the cold, empty void of the galaxy, lies a quiet message, simple but powerful, that the true worth of a person, a people, or even an entire civilization does not lie in their origin. It lies in the choices they make after. The humanity of this story is far from perfect. They were born from mistakes, from greed, from the cold calculations of others. But they refused to let their past chain their future. They stood up. They learned to love, to protect, to rebuild meaning into their very existence. And in our real world, it is the same. It does not matter where you come from. It does not matter what your past looks like. What makes you truly worthy of pride is never what was handed to you, but what you chose to become. And sometimes, the greatest strength a human being can have is not the power to defeat others, but the courage to never abandon yourself